Hi, my name is Hanna, and today we have our US tax expert Derren. We also have our US real estate and legal expert Jay, and we will be discussing the buying process for Asian investor who would like to invest in the US real estate. Hai, nama saya Hanna. Hari ini kami memiliki pakar pajak Amerika Serikat kami, Derren, dan kami juga memiliki pakar real estate dan hukum Amerika Serikat kami, Jay. Dan kami akan membahas proses pembelian untuk investor Asia yang ingin berinvestasi di real estate Amerika Serikat.
This podcast channel is about you, successful international entrepreneurs, successful expats, successful investors. Sponsored by ACCA.tax.
All right, Jay, great to see you again. So for those who may not have seen the episode that we did before, could you please briefly introduce yourself again?
Sure. My name is Jay Knight. I'm an American citizen that is living and working abroad currently now in Indonesia. And we have been doing, we've been talking about real estate and different phases of real estate. So I guess we will continue along those lines today.
Okay, fantastic. So, all right. And again, you promised me that you won't laugh at my questions because they're going to be really simple. I am a first-time buyer, and I'm not from the US. Maybe I'm from Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. I found someone who's licensed, someone who's a professional, and they found me the right property, and I'm ready to take action. What should I do? Should I just wire them the money? What are the next steps in the buying process?
All right. So let's talk about this process, because this is going to be the first step, is going to be a very important step for a lot of different reasons. And as a tax professional, you could probably talk about some of those. But I think that the first question you have to ask is, how do you want to hold the title to the property that you're going to buy? Is this property going to be a property that you're going to use for your own vacation residence? Is it going to be a property that you're going to move into? Is it going to be a property that you're going to use strictly from a business standpoint, either running a business or renting it out as a business? So all these types of questions you have to first determine yourself. And once we can determine that, then we have to ask, well, how do we want to hold the property? So this is always a good starting point. So you could hold it in your own name, or if you have a business, you might want to hold it in the name of the business, or you may want to set up a new business that's strictly used for this property. So I would say that, that would be the first step that we would want to kind of get through to determine how best and what is the most way to protect ourselves in this new venture. So, you could probably talk a little bit about the tax implications, but maybe we can go over that another time, but if you want. But yeah, so that would be the first step that we would want to kind of get through.
Yeah, and that is, as you pointed out, that's a huge topic in itself. For those who are doing investment property, obviously we always recommend using a structure, using an LLC. And it's not so much an issue of tax, but as you rightly repeated a few times, it's about protection. And, I think we mentioned in the previous talk that we did in this series that it's really important to have both an accountant and a lawyer who are both US qualified to advise you through a process like this. And you need both, because while a CPA or an accountant can advise on tax, they know very little about asset protection. In fact, I think it was Robert Kiyosaki who joked that CPA stands for can't protect assets because they're really bad at it. They don't have that hat on. Whereas a lawyer may be really good, or a legal consultant will be really good on protection, but may not know some of the tax implications, especially if you're buying from a high tax jurisdiction like Indonesia or to a lesser extent Malaysia. So definitely some consulting around protection, and the protection isn't just, and again, we'll go into this in detail perhaps in the next one, but there's inside protection. So protection against, your tenant slips and falls. They don't want them suing you. And there's outside protection. So you don't want any external party, whatever grievance you may have in other lines of businesses, coming over and suing and having a claim on these assets. So definitely something to talk about. But let's assume that we've had that figured out. So I decided I want to buy it in an entity, some structure. What do I do next?
All right, so I guess the next question would be then, are you going to pay for this property in cash, or are you going to try to go through a bank or a mortgage company and finance the purchase? So again, this will be something based for your own decision. But if you are going to get a loan, then there's a whole different set of procedures and everything else that we could go through. But and a lot of overseas people, they do like to buy in cash. So if you're going to buy in cash, that makes things a little bit easier and gives you a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, and I guess in our practice, just drawing from our real life examples, we have clients obviously in Singapore, Indonesia, and as far north as Hong Kong. We don't have any clients in mainland China, but in Hong Kong, and they all tend to buy cash. So I guess maybe we can proceed based on that understanding.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we do see that a lot, that a lot of people from overseas, they come in and they just want to buy in all cash, which gives them a lot of leverage. And of course, for the seller, that's the best news that they can hear, right? So, because they don't have to deal with all this other stuff regarding a lot of the other paperwork and having to go through all the contingencies of getting a loan and all the process there. So, okay, so let's proceed then under that understanding. So once we have that understanding that we're going to pay in cash, and we have found an agent or a professional, licensed professional that you feel comfortable with and you trust and you want to use to help you facilitate, then the next thing is really just trying to make sure that you find the perfect property that you're looking for, right? So this is where having a licensed professional really will be helpful, because based upon the information that you provide them, they can really tailor whatever searches that they're trying to do to be able to find the best and most suitable property for you. So there's all kinds of different things that could be, people are looking at in a property, right? So, I mean, some people may want to have a balcony or a pool or an end unit or a two-story building, or might want to be near a school or near a university. Say, for example, if you want to use it as a rental property, having it next to a university or a college would be a good idea, because there's always going to be students that need rent. So there's a lot of different variables, but the more that you empower your agent with information, the better that they can help find the perfect property for you.
Okay, so let's assume that I found the right agent, I'm comfortable with him or her, and they found me something, I like it. What do we do next?
All right, perfect. Well, now this becomes the fun part. So what typically will happen is that you will find the property you want, and if you think that whatever the price is, you will tell your agent or your broker, say, hey, this is the property, let's make it happen. So that your agent or your broker is then going to do what's called make an offer. And making an offer is actually writing up a legal form that's provided through certain standardized real estate forms. And they'll write out an offer for the price and everything else that you may want to put in there. Sign it. And then your agent will send it over to the seller's agent. And then what will normally happen is a couple things. One, the seller's agent and the seller will review the offer. They can go through it, and if they like it, they'll accept it. Okay? Easy peasy, no problem. But they could most likely, and what normally typically happens is that they will send back what's called a counteroffer. And what that means is that maybe they've agreed to some of the terms that you've put in your offer, but not all the terms. And it could be the price difference. It could be how much money you need to put down in terms of your deposit. It could mean how long the transaction can be. Like say you put in your offer that you need 2 months before you can close because you're buying this property contingent on some other things, maybe selling a house that you already own, so you free up some cash that you're going to use to this, whatever it may be. So there's different contingencies that could be put in there, which they may not agree to. So they may send you back a counter offer saying, okay, well, we agree to the price, but we need you to make it so that the property will close within 3 weeks, as opposed to maybe you would put in there a month and a half. So whatever it may be. So they could send you a counteroffer. Now, it could just be strictly based upon the price, which is often the case. You put in an offer for $400,000, and they want to put it in they want to counter you back at 420, something like that. So that could be one alternative, that they counter you back. Doesn't mean that they're saying no to you. They're just saying that this offer, the way you have it right now, is not going to be acceptable at that exactly the way you put it. They could also reject your offer altogether. Now, that could be for different reasons as well. Maybe they had other offers that were already higher, and so they're not going to really consider your offer. Or maybe it could be for a lot of different things. So this would be the main thing that happens. Put in an offer, and then you wait to hear back. Are they going to accept it? Are they going to reject it? Or are they going to counter you? And once they counter you, if that's the case, you can actually counter them. You can actually do a counter to their counter and go back and forth until you guys eventually have a meeting of the minds and agree to all the terms.
Okay. So at this point, I haven't made any deposit or anything. Is there anything that's legally binding? Like, can I just, even if I said like 400, as you said, and they say, okay, yeah, 400, let's go for it. And then I'm like, well, I don't want it anymore. I found something that I like better down the road, and I back out. Are there any implications to that?
All right, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So if you send them an offer, okay, and they accept your offer, but you haven't, it's just a verbal agreement of acceptance, okay? At that point, you are not really at risk, okay? Now, verbal agreements can be considered to be legally binding, but in this situation, there really isn't anything that they can do, any recourse. So, because nothing has really fully been signed. Now, if you guys agree to terms and then a written purchase contract is written up based upon those mutually agreed to terms, and both parties sign it, now you have a purchase agreement, which is a legally binding contract. Okay. But now you are in a legal contract.
One question, because previously you said when we do the offer, it's going to be on a template provided by our broker, agent, or whatever. So it could be in writing, but even if it's in writing, it's not yet legally binding, correct?
Correct, because you guys have not fully entered into a purchase contract. All you've done is simply given them an offer, and even if he sends back a verbal acceptance of that offer, there isn't any full committed purchase contract signed by both parties with those exact terms. Okay. Once we've gotten to that point, then yes, we have a fully binding legal contract. And normally, if that's the case, once we reach the contract phase, the purchase contract phase, in the offer and the acceptance, there was a deposit amount that was mutually agreed upon. So let's just say it was $25,000, okay? If later on you decide as the buyer to back out of the contract for whatever reason, maybe you had an emergency situation where you had other expenses that you had to account for, or whatever the case may be, and it happens quite a bit. But at that point, since you are in a legally binding contract, you will forfeit the deposit monies that you have put down.
Okay.
If you back out of that.
So just to be clear, it's at the point where the deposit is paid, that's when it becomes legally binding, right?
Okay, so actually what happens is that, yes, that's correct.
Mhm.
The deposit will be paid after there's a signed purchase agreement between the two parties. So it becomes legally binding as a contract once that has been signed, that contract. But typically, it's usually a day or two after that contract is signed that the deposit is made. So technically, it becomes legally binding once the contract's signed, but normally the deposit isn't paid for another day or two.
Right, because, I mean, this is like taking me back quite a few years now. But when I did back in business school, that one module that we did on contracts, it was offer, acceptance, consideration, intention to create legal relations, right? So there's no consideration, but even though there's no consideration in the form of a deposit being paid, it still is, you still have a binding contract, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Absolutely. You have a binding contract that has been signed. So it is a written contract that has legal binding to it.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So we worked that out. So now it's a done deal. I'm not backing out. And
You don't want to lose that deposit.
I've sent the deposit. Now the thing is that sometimes with foreign buyers, sometimes the agent or whoever in the U.S. is insisting on sending 100% of the purchase price up front. Should that create red flags, or is that normal, or is that abnormal?
All right, that's another great question, actually, because things are done a little bit differently in terms of how purchasers are done in the United States as opposed to what I've experienced so far in Asia.
Mm-hmm.
So typically what will happen is this. I think we touched on it on our last segment. There's a process which is called the escrow process. And escrow is a company that's specifically designed to facilitate the smooth transactions of real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And what it is, it's a third party. So it doesn't represent the buyer, it doesn't represent the seller. It's an independent third party. And its job is to facilitate the sale. Mm. So one thing is that when you are instructed to make that deposit, whatever the amount was, that deposit should never, ever, ever be wired or sent directly to the buyer, or to the seller, sorry. Okay? Mm. Never. And that's the whole reason why they have these escrow companies. The escrow company is where you're going to send your deposit. And that deposit is going to be put into a separate escrow account. Mm-hmm. Okay? And it's held in that escrow account until the final end of the transaction. So that deposit will never go to the seller while the escrow process is ongoing. So if there is anyone who ever tells you, send me the deposit or send me the full amount, 100% of it up front to me directly or to my business, definitely is a red flag, and you should run from them as fast as you can. Wow. Absolutely.
Okay, that's good to know. And yeah. Of course, like as a teaser, anyone that's watching or listening, we're going to go into some actual real life cases that are being litigated right now, where Asian buyers have had, let's say, misunderstandings, in purchasing U.S. real estate because they didn't follow these basic principles. So this is good to know and to keep in mind. Okay, so it's an escrow. What comes next?
All right, so you've wired those deposit funds to an escrow company. Now, the escrow company, even though it's a third-party agent, typically what happens is, especially if you are an overseas buyer, you're not going to know or have any connections, most likely, to any escrow company.
Mm-hmm.
So typically, in that situation, we do allow, it's customary to allow the seller to choose the escrow company. Maybe they have worked with that company before, so it could be a good thing actually, because they know exactly how to work with this seller and how to get everything done, and they have a process in place. So the seller, even though is not paying them directly, he does have some leniency in terms of being able to choose the escrow company to handle the transaction. So once we open up escrow,
Mm-hmm.
and the money has been deposited,
Mm-hmm.
then the next thing that happens is that the seller will provide to the escrow company all the paperwork and all the disclosures about the property. All right, so he'll give them disclosures about could be a lot of different things, but mostly it's going to be about, is there any kind of defects to the property? Okay, is there any kind of environmental hazards? Is there any kind of structural damage? Is there anything that's been done underneath the property in terms of hazards or any kinds of things that was found there that could be dangerous? Okay. Or legally in California, they also have to disclose whether or not someone actually has passed away on the property itself. So all these things are disclosures that the seller will then have to give to the escrow company that can be reviewed and known by the buyer. So it's really there to protect the buyer.
So seeing that escrow serves such a critical purpose or role in this process, how do I as a foreign buyer know that this escrow company that you, the seller, has recommended is legit? Suppose it's your buddy next door, right? He set up a website. How do I know, right?
Right. And truthfully, there is sometimes not unfair or bad dealing between the seller and the escrow company. That's not really, we find that because they both are independent parties. Mm-hmm. But sometimes we will find that it could be they've done a lot of real estate transactions and they just are comfortable using that escrow company because they know the people and they know how to get stuff done. Mm-hmm. But to get back to your question, the way that you can know how credible it is that your agent or your broker will also be able to have communication with them, and he can do she can do due diligence about that company. She can find out, is their company ever been suspected of any kind of shadiness or anything like that. So it really will come down to your agent or your broker also doing due diligence on the company. And if you really object to that company because the agent that you have has found there's been some sort of things in the past, well, then you can object to it and ask that, hey, look, we don't want to use this escrow. Let's find a different one. So you do have some say in the matter. But like I said, it's just customary that the seller usually gets to choose it, but it's not set in stone. And there are ways to object if your agent feels that they're would rather do business with a different escrow company.
Okay, so I guess that's another important tip that you've just given, in that your agent doesn't disappear once he or she has introduced you to the seller, right? They need to stick with you along the process and make sure everything goes through the completion, right?
Absolutely. They have to be there every step of the way, especially as you being a foreign buyer and not being able to get hands-on stuff all the time. You're really using them at a much more crucial way, and they have to be the eyes and the ears for you and everything. So their relationship and their ability to know what's going on, and being able to, do due diligence and help you in every aspect and every facet of the transaction will be critical. So, so having a good agent is going to be a critical part if you're buying from overseas, for sure.
Right. And in terms of escrow, the fee, like what is customary? What is the range that you'd probably be needing to budget to pay? And who pays? Is it one buyer, seller, or both?
All right, great. It's another good question. And again, this is something that people do get a little bit confused about. So for the escrow company, there are, of course, fees. No one's going to be working for both of you and not have any kind of fees. So at the end of the escrow, when the property is being transferred, okay, and everything is going to close, there's going to be a quote unquote a closing date where everything comes to a head. At that time, there are going to be fees that are going to be owed to the escrow company. Now, some of those fees are going to be owed from the seller. Some of those fees are going to be owed by the buyer. So there are fees involved. A lot of times, it will partially depend on the purchase price of the actual property. So there isn't any really hard and fast standardization of what those fees will be. They will differ. Some escrow companies charge a lot. Some escrow companies don't charge as much. And then there's going to be other different fees as well that we can talk about it when we get down to it. But there will be other fees as well. However, if you have a good agent who knows what they're doing, who knows the process and has done this before, they can object to certain fees and have them getting thrown out. Because sometimes the escrow company, of course, the escrow company is like anything else. It wants to make money. So if it can throw on an extra fee here or an extra fee here or next, they will try. Some of them will try to do that. That's just part and parcel of how escrow companies work. But again, your agent or your broker can object to some fees, negotiate some of those fees to get rid of them. But yes, there will be fees, and it will depend on the purchase price, and it also will vary between different escrow companies.
Gotcha. Okay, so I have an agent, broker, whatever that I trust, and they've guided me through the process. I'm comfortable that the escrow company is doing their job, the seller is doing the right thing. We've come to closing. What happens next?
All right. So, well, first of all, there's a couple other steps that we probably will need to go through before we actually get to the close. One of those steps, again, this is still under the umbrella of the escrow, and the escrow company will handle a lot of this. But one of the steps is to get the property inspected. Okay. Why is that important? It's important because even though you get this disclosures from the seller about all the things that were wrong with it, any environmental problems, if anything like that, we have to do our own due diligence as buyers and get the property properly inspected. So what does that mean exactly? Well, you hire someone to go out there and do a full inspection of the property. So you got to make sure that there's no structural damage. They have to make sure that there aren't any repairs that are needed. They have to make sure that maybe the roof isn't leaking, or the chimney doesn't need sweeping, or the sewer's got some backup problem, or the air conditioners don't work, or whatever it could be. So we got to get all that inspected. Now, once that's inspected, if there are problems with these things that need repairs, we can go back and renegotiate the actual price of the property to offset whatever the cost would be to get these repairs fixed. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the report, sorry, just to be clear, so the report would not just include the deficiencies, but it will give an indication as to how much it will cost to make them right? Yeah. Okay,
so the inspection will just tell you what's wrong with it.
Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't necessarily will tell you what the cost of the repairs will be. but it could.
Yeah.
Depends.
Mm-hmm.
But that is something else that we could also get done, get someone to give a fair market value of those repairs, because again, that will be dependent upon the area, the city, the contractor, a lot of different variables, right? Because you can get 10 people to give you 10 different estimates on what it will cost to fix a leaking roof, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but the point, I guess, would be is that inspection is crucial and cannot be forgotten in this process. You have to get the house inspected.
Right. And then, of course, you'd be doing other things, presumably like checking whether the seller has the right to sell it, whether it's encumbered in any way. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So really the next thing that we would do after we got it inspected is then we would get it appraised.
Yeah.
And what I mean by appraised is we would actually hire an appraiser. There's specifically someone, just in terms of the terminology, an appraiser is someone who goes out and appraises a house or a property to find out what its fair market value is. And there's different ways to appraise, and we could do a whole segment on the different theories and the different appraisal methods. There's different methods that some appraisers can use to come to the fair market value. But that's another segment for another time. But the point of it is you got to get it appraised, because why? If the seller is selling it for $450,000, we get it appraised, but it only comes in at $400,000. Now we can still go ahead and buy it. Maybe it's a seller's market, and we know it's going to go up and appreciate quickly. And there's 3 other offers that are on the table, and so we had to spend more money and give a higher offer just to get into the property. Okay, so we can do that, right? But if, on the other hand, the property value is fair markedly appraised significantly lower, we may want to come back and renegotiate with the seller about the price. So getting it appraised is going to be extremely important. Now, if it does appraise fine and we're okay with that, whatever it is, then the next thing we need to do is we need to buy a homeowner's insurance policy. You mentioned earlier in one of your in one of the questions about how if you have a renter in a property and they slip and fall, when we were talking about structures, the first question. So we want to make sure if we have a homeowner's insurance policy that in case we do have renters, we're covered, okay, that we have insurance on the property.
Okay. So insurance, and then what?
So then that comes to what you had mentioned in the last part, was we have to get what's called a title report. Okay. So a title company, again, this is all going to be still in the escrow process, but a title company is a separate company that often has hand-in-hand relationship with the escrow company because they work so closely together, or they could just be a completely separate company. But the title company, what they're going to do is they're going to make a report and a finding about the property itself to make sure, as you mentioned, that the seller is the actual legal owner of the property, or that there isn't any back taxes owed or any encumbrances, any taxes, judgments, HOA dues, anything like that is actually on the property that would make it harder to deal with if we're going to buy it. Right. So we get a title company to give us a title report.
Just to clarify for anyone who may have been listening or not, HOA would be homeowner association dues, right? So,
right, exactly. Or it could be considered condo dues. It depends. There's different terminology, but right.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. What's that?
Yeah, no problem. So once we get that title report, and if it comes back as being clear, then we know that the title is good. We don't have any issues with the title. We can feel comfortable moving forward. And then what we would do is we would purchase a title insurance policy, which would protect us as the buyer against any kind of legal claims that may come up that the seller didn't know about. Okay, so it's just for our own protection and our own peace of mind.
So, are we ready to close yet?
We are ready to close.
That's right.
So there is quite a few steps, but all these steps are really there for the protection of both parties, but more specifically for the buyer. Right.
Okay. So everything comes back with the right results, and everyone's comfortable with the process. Then the money that's held in escrow is released to the seller, and the buyer gets legal possession of the property, right?
That's correct. So what happens is a couple things. One, right before the close, right? They'll usually set a date, like a closing date is January 18th. Okay. So usually the 16th or the 17th, or it could even be on that 18th, the day of the 18th. We do what's called a final walkthrough. And what this final walkthrough is that the buyer, or in this case, maybe his agent, if he's not in the country, will go through to the property, inspect it one last time to make sure that there isn't any issues with the property.
All right.
Okay?
So I just want to touch on a point that you just mentioned. Do I need to fly from, if I'm in Singapore, do I need to fly into the US, or can the agent just do everything for me?
The agent can do everything for you, but in order for that to happen, you would need to sign a power of attorney.
Okay.
And typically what happens is that the agent isn't really the person that you would have do that, although it's possible, but it would be better if you had a person that was not involved.
Right.
Like a non-participating party. They could do that for you.
Okay. So that would typically be a legal professional, a finance an accountant. Okay. A profession. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, the other thing is that they do have a lot of technology now that allows you to sign a lot of these documents yourself through the technology. So instead of having to be there and fly there, you could actually be able to sign a lot of the documents that you need to be signed through online technology.
Okay, so like Adobe DocuSign or something like that. Okay, that's good.
Yeah. And the technology used.
Sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the technology they use in real estate is already set up for these types of purchases, so they have it built in, so it's usually not a problem. The other thing is they do need to be notarized, which, again, can be done in a similar fashion.
Okay. And would that vary by state, or is it pretty universal?
It will vary by state. So I'm talking specifically about California.
Gotcha. Okay.
But it'll be similar. Some of the states may not have the same advanced technology, but I would imagine most of them probably would.
Okay, good. So either I get someone sign a power of attorney and they represent me on this final walkthrough, or we use technology, we use Zoom, we sign stuff online. What happens next?
All right. All right, so the final part then will be once the walkthrough is completed and everything's fine, all the final documents are going to be ready to sign. That's what we just alluded to. So both parties, like I said, they usually set a date. Both parties are going to be, come to the signing, either through technology or into the office itself, sign all the documents. Okay. Once all the documents are signed, then the money is transferred. Okay, so if you've already put the deposit in, that money, but then the rest of the money also needs to be transferred. So it could be you could wire it to them on that day to the escrow company, again, not to the buyer himself, but to the escrow company.
Right.
And then the escrow company will release all the funds to all the different parties. Okay, so they'll get everything paid. And we talked a little bit before about the title company, the title insurance, the homeowner's policy, the inspection. So all of this will be paid out of the escrow. Okay, so this will, so for example, maybe it would cost $6,000 to do all that. Sometimes they'll take that out of the deposit and pay it all, and then we still got to come up with the rest of the money that's owed at the time of the closing. So these costs are going to be burdened by the buyer. For example, the inspector to go and inspect the property. That's going to be something that you want as a buyer for protection, so that's something you're going to pay. The title report, again, to make sure that everything is clear, that's for your protection. So that's going to be something that the buyer is going to pay. The homeowner's insurance policy, again, your protection. So all those things will be cost of the buyer. Now, let's talk about the fees for the commission for the agents and the brokers, because this is something that people are always asking about, and they're not always clear because it can change depending on the state. So in California, as a buyer, you do not pay any of the fees even for your agent or your broker. So you don't pay for those. Now, that will come from the seller.
Okay.
The seller actually pays your agent. So you don't have any, you don't have any fees to pay the agent or the broker. Right? So those are not your burden. Those are not your fees.
Okay, great. So
after all this is done, then the keys are handed over to you. Now you got the keys, and the escrow company will record the new deeds with the county or with the city, normally with the county. And after a couple months, you will get a brand new recorded deed that says you are the legal owner of this property.
Right. But I don't need to wait a couple of months, right? From the time. No. Right. Yeah. Keys done. Okay.
That's when you'll get the original new deed. Because you know how counties work. It just takes time. But you'll get paperwork that shows obviously that you are the legal owner. But the actual the original new deed will come usually depending on the county, but could be anywhere up to 2 months.
Okay, fantastic.
But now you're the owner of the property.
Fantastic. Happy days. So I think that's great for where we are right now, and I look forward to our next episode where we talk about structuring the transaction.
Structuring transactions and even a few case studies.
Exactly. Fantastic. Jay, we appreciate your time, your insight, your expertise. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. All right, buddy. You got it anytime. Good talk with you.